Jessica Walker is the CEO of Walker Financial Group, a leading financial conglomerate worth billions of dollars. She is a strong, independent woman, a model of success in the banking industry. Coming from a modest background, Jessica rose through sheer determination and relentless effort, not only to build a powerful financial empire, but also to establish a lasting legacy. Her career is marked by remarkable achievements and milestones few can reach. Yet, when she looks back on all that she has accomplished, Jessica feels not only pride in her company, but also a deep sense of responsibility to foster a fair and inclusive financial environment. Despite her power and success, Jessica never allows herself to become complacent. As the CEO of Walker Financial Group, she constantly looks for ways to improve and evolve the company. However, one issue continues to weigh heavily on her: racial discrimination in the banking industry. Jessica has witnessed the systemic injustice in how financial institutions treat minority communities, especially Black clients. Even though her company has implemented strong diversity and inclusion policies, she knows much more needs to be done. That's why she decided to take bold action. In a daring move, Jessica chose to conduct a secret investigation into how Monarch Financial, one of the banks under her leadership, treats its customers. She told no one in the company about her decision. Jessica wanted to discover the truth as objectively as possible. To do this, she disguised herself as an ordinary customer, avoiding all attention to experience exactly what clients of Monarch Financial go through. While she had the power and influence to enforce change from the top, Jessica knew she could only fully grasp the reality if she lived it herself. Driven by a spirit of continuous learning and improvement, Jessica began this journey with unwavering resolve. She didn't want to simply identify surface-level issues. She aimed to understand what was really happening inside the system, what her customers were facing, and most importantly, how to ensure that any reforms she introduced would have a lasting impact. She was not only looking at policy flaws or service gaps, but also unconscious bias and the subtle forms of discrimination that bank employees might not even realize they held. Though she already had a long list of accomplishments, Jessica refused to be satisfied. She wanted to create a more just world, especially in the finance industry, where everyone deserves equal access to services. As CEO, she wanted to directly examine whether Monarch Financial was living up to the values she believed in. She knew that only by living the customer experience herself could she make the right calls and implement meaningful, far-reaching change. This undercover investigation wasn't just an experiment. It was a strategic move by Jessica to audit the fairness within the banking system. She wanted to see if Monarch Financial's policies were truly serving all customers equally, especially Black customers who are too often treated unfairly in this industry. With strong determination and careful preparation, Jessica began her mission, disguised so no one would recognize her. Jessica has always believed that real change must start from within. That's why she didn't just assign this task to someone else. She took it on herself to witness, firsthand, what was happening on the ground. Only by confronting these issues directly could she craft realistic, long-term solutions. She refused to tolerate any form of discrimination or disregard for underserved customers, and it was that conviction that drove her to take the kind of bold action no one else dared to. With this mission, Jessica knew she wouldn't just uncover the cracks in the system. She would lay the groundwork for a fairer foundation for banking. Her goal wasn't simply to fix a single branch, but to transform the way the entire bank operated. That was the ultimate objective behind the undercover investigation she was about to carry out. Jessica Walker, a visionary leader, made a bold strategic move in her career when she secretly acquired Monarch Financial 3 weeks ago. However, the details of this transaction have not yet been made public. The reason Jessica has kept the deal under wraps isn't just to surprise the bank. It's because of a much deeper purpose she intends to pursue. She didn't want to announce this change prematurely before completing one crucial plan: conducting a covert survey to gain a clearer understanding of the issues embedded within the bank's system. The acquisition of Monarch Financial was not only a smart financial decision, it carried deeply personal significance for Jessica. One of the most important reasons she chose this bank was its direct connection to her family history. 30 years ago, at this very branch, Jessica's grandmother, Eloise Walker, was denied a home loan. Despite being financially qualified and having a perfect credit record, she faced vague, unexplained rejections that would change the course of her family's life forever. That decision cost her the chance to own a home. And for years afterward, Jessica's family continued to live in rental housing. This experience haunted Jessica throughout her life and became a driving force behind her career. That's why Jessica didn't acquire Monarch Financial merely for business gain. She did it to conduct a real-world audit of how the bank operates, especially in how it treats customers from minority communities. With that goal in mind, she chose to begin her covert survey at the very same branch where her grandmother was once rejected. This would be the first location she assessed to determine whether the bank's history of racial discrimination was still present in its daily operations. Jessica decided to go undercover, not as a powerful CEO but as a regular black customer, so she could experience firsthand what minority clients go through. Jessica's goal was not only to uncover racial bias but also to gain a deeper understanding of how black customers are treated in a financial system that she now owns. She believed that only by truly understanding the obstacles these clients face could she design concrete, effective solutions that would transform the bank's culture and create a fairer, more transparent environment for everyone. Her vision was to build a banking model where no one would fear being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. Only their financial capability would matter. Jessica knew that, as a CEO, she could issue top-down mandates and reforms, but without a real understanding of the customer experience, those changes might be superficial. That's why she chose a hands-on, ground-level approach, by embedding herself directly within the banking system and living the role of a customer. This was her opportunity to prove that true transformation doesn't just come from directives at the top, but from confronting the lived realities that everyday customers face. With this conviction, Jessica began her undercover mission at Monarch Financial. She carefully prepared for the role, dressing modestly, disguising her appearance so that no one would recognize her as the CEO. Her goal wasn't just to gather data. It was to uncover subtle injustices, unspoken biases, and systemic failures that no one else could see. Only then could she introduce deep, lasting reforms that would reshape the bank from the inside out. Jessica entered Monarch Financial with a clear purpose: to evaluate the bank's service process without being recognized. To carry out this plan, she carefully disguised herself to blend in with the crowd of regular customers. She wore a simple outfit, completely different from her usual style. Instead of elegant suits and expensive accessories which she was often seen wearing in public, Jessica opted for a grey cardigan and basic jeans, without any indication that she was the CEO of Walker Financial Group, nor any sign that she actually owned the bank she was infiltrating. She wanted to be just another customer, no different from anyone else at the bank. Every detail, from her outfit to her hairstyle, was meticulously planned to avoid drawing attention. She even wore a pair of basic eyeglasses, not the high-end designer frames she typically used in meetings with partners. This wasn't just a simple disguise. It was a deliberate and subtle preparation to ensure she could observe the reality without being immediately identified. Jessica's goal was to determine whether the bank truly treated all customers equally, or if discrimination still lurked beneath its polished exterior. As she stepped inside the bank, Jessica immediately sensed a difference from what she had expected. Though everything looked grand, with towering marble columns, gleaming stone floors, and ornately decorated service counters, something felt off. The surrounding customers were all busy with their errands, but their faces showed signs of anxiety, or even frustration, from having to wait too long for assistance. Most notably, when Jessica observed the employees behind the counters, she noticed their demeanor lacked the warmth one would expect from a reputable financial institution. There were no smiles, no welcoming greetings, just curt responses, and a noticeable lack of care. Jessica had promised herself she would remain patient and observant before forming any conclusions. She knew she couldn't rely solely on reports or directives from upper management. She needed to feel the real atmosphere of the bank, to understand how employees treated customers, especially black customers like herself. She wanted to find out whether the bank truly upheld its commitment to diversity and fairness. For that reason, she decided to go through the process of opening a bank account herself, to experience the customer service firsthand. Every word, every step was carefully noted by Jessica, as she understood that every interaction at that moment could serve as crucial evidence in her investigation. As Jessica approached the service counter, she saw a young employee with a weary expression processing paperwork for the customer ahead of her. She noticed how the staff member never once looked up from the computer to greet the client. There was no friendliness, no attempt to make the customer feel welcomed. Jessica wasn't surprised. During her observation, she had seen this same behavior from most of the staff. Their indifference and lack of concern were evident not just in what they said, but in how they acted. She realized this wasn't just a matter of poor employee training. It could very well be part of a deeper issue in how the bank operated. When it was her turn, Jessica stepped forward and stated her purpose: to open a basic bank account. She politely asked the employee to provide information about the types of accounts and services the bank offered. She maintained a friendly demeanor, all while carefully noting every facial expression, tone, and gesture of the employee during the interaction. One thing stood out clearly: the staff at Monarch Financial showed no enthusiasm or genuine willingness to assist customers. This became even more obvious when the employee subtly tried to usher her away, encouraging her to use the bank's automated services or online platforms rather than engaging with a live representative. With the employee's cold and dismissive attitude, Jessica began to feel the very experience that her grandmother, Eloise, had faced many years ago. From the lack of care in their actions to the indifferent suggestions, she realized that Monarch Financial had not changed. It still failed to treat all customers fairly, especially those like her grandmother. Although Jessica had mentally prepared herself for this experience, she couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration rising within her. These issues were not just shortcomings in customer service. They were rooted in something much deeper, tied to the discrimination and inequity she had come here to expose. Jessica stood in line at the teller counter, just like any other customer. But deep down, she couldn't help but feel a stark difference. She noticed how the staff interacted with the customers before her. Several of them, most of whom were white, were greeted politely, quickly served, and even escorted to private areas for personalized consultations. But when it was her turn, the lack of care was apparent from the start. The teller glanced at her briefly, then returned to the computer screen with little interest. While it wasn't immediately obvious, the difference in treatment grew more apparent with each moment. Jessica wasn't the only one who could feel it, but she was one of the few who could clearly recognize it for what it was. When Jessica reached the counter, she politely asked the teller for information about bank accounts and inquired about the services the bank provided. However, instead of being warmly welcomed like the customers before her, she was directed to use the ATM. "You can just use the ATM over there, it's faster," the employee said, without enthusiasm. A sense of unease rose in Jessica's chest, as she realized that the bank employee had no intention of assisting her. Rather, they were trying to divert her to self-service options without offering the same kind of personal assistance that other customers had received. This wasn't the first time she had witnessed such discrimination, but now it was more glaring than ever. Jessica couldn't help but recall the first time her grandmother Eloise came to this very bank 30 years ago. She remembered how Eloise had once shared the story of being denied a home loan despite having solid financial standing and a perfect credit score. Instead of being helped like other clients, her grandmother was rejected with vague excuses about zoning requirements, none of which were ever clearly explained. That decision had altered her family's future, preventing Eloise from investing in a home she had long dreamed of. Now, Jessica could feel that the same injustice her grandmother had once faced was still alive today. It wasn't just a story from the past. The discriminatory behavior was happening right in front of her. What Jessica was witnessing wasn't just poor customer service. It was systematic discrimination embedded into the very culture of this bank. As she stood there, she saw a white customer walk in and be greeted immediately. They weren't just welcomed with a smile, but also guided to a private consultation area. This further confirmed to Jessica that racial bias was not some minor issue. This wasn't just a failure of customer service. It was a symptom of a much deeper system, one in which black customers were treated differently from white customers, simply because of the color of their skin. Although Jessica tried to maintain her composure, a wave of frustration stirred inside her. She couldn't believe that after years of building Walker Financial Group and fighting to uplift the black community, she was now witnessing blatant racial bias inside the very bank she owned. She tried not to let the anger show on her face, but each indifferent gesture from the staff felt like a slap in the face to everything she had worked for. This discrimination wasn't just about what was said or done, it was built into the bank's everyday operations. Jessica knew she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She had already decided that this experience wouldn't just become another note in a report, it demanded direct action. With each discriminatory act she witnessed, the urgency to address the issue grew stronger. She would no longer sit back and simply observe, she would confront it, even if it meant discomfort or resistance from those maintaining the system. This wasn't just a challenge for the bank, it was a personal test of her own leadership and commitment to change. Jessica began to feel that the time for real change had come. She was ready to face everything happening inside her bank, not just as a CEO, but as a black woman who had endured discrimination and now had the power to do something about it. She was determined to uncover every issue here and now, and ensure that no form of discrimination would continue to exist within the institution she owned. Jessica stood at the teller counter, feeling increasingly disheartened as her turn finally came. Aidan Fox, a young bank teller, glanced at her with a noticeably forced expression as she approached. She smiled and began to explain her purpose, inquiring about account products and banking services. However, the response from Aidan was nothing like what she had observed with previous customers. Instead of enthusiastically explaining and providing detailed information, Aidan simply handed Jessica a brochure on basic account services without even acknowledging the rest of her questions. A sense of being dismissed began to take hold in Jessica's mind. She could clearly sense the lack of interest and the difference in treatment compared to the white customers who had been greeted warmly and ushered to private consultation tables. Jessica, in contrast, was handed a brochure and ignored by Aidan, who barely looked her in the eye. His cold demeanor made her feel like just a number, an unimportant customer. When Jessica tried to ask for more information about investment services and premium savings accounts, Aidan visibly appeared uncomfortable. He looked toward the customer service area where Preston Reed, the branch's customer service manager, had been observing. Moments later, Preston approached, gave Jessica a quick once-over, and immediately instructed Aidan, "She can use the self-service options. It'll be quicker. She doesn't need to meet with an advisor." His tone was cold, void of any courtesy or professionalism. Preston clearly wanted the interaction to end as quickly and simply as possible, with no effort invested in a real conversation. His statement confirmed what Jessica had suspected from the beginning. She was not considered a priority customer, and she was expected to follow a preset script without any genuine assistance or consultation. Jessica felt a pang of shock when Preston blatantly directed her to use automated services, denying her access to a human advisor. She knew for a fact that other customers, particularly white customers, had been treated with care and escorted to private consulting areas. This moment brought into sharp focus the racial bias she had been suspecting. It was as if the color of her skin had predetermined the kind of service she would receive, yet she had come here as a potential client, eager to explore banking and investment services to support her financial goals. But the indifferent treatment from both Aidan and Preston left her feeling like an outsider. Not only was she dismissed, but she was also pushed into a corner, deprived of genuine interaction with any staff member. As she waited by the automated kiosk, Jessica couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Everything was becoming clearer than ever. She began to realize that the issue wasn't merely about the attitude of a few employees, it was part of a much larger system. A system where racial discrimination had become embedded in the very fabric of the bank's operations. Her requests hadn't been met with the same respect or support given to others. Meanwhile, customers who looked different, who were white, were welcomed and treated with care. This inequality was exactly what Jessica had come to uncover, not just for herself, but for the many others who faced this kind of injustice daily. Her frustration and anger deepened as she thought about what her grandmother had endured decades ago when she was denied a home loan at this same bank. Jessica recalled how her grandmother had been rejected despite meeting all the financial requirements, receiving only vague reasons and never a clear explanation. That moment had forever changed her family's trajectory, forcing them into years of renting instead of home ownership. The injustice her grandmother suffered wasn't just a memory. It was a living part of the very system Jessica was confronting now. She could feel the same institutional racism playing out in real time, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. As Jessica stepped away from the self-service area and headed toward the exit, she observed other customers, mostly white, being warmly greeted and cheerfully assisted by bank staff. Employees smiled, worked diligently, and offered help at every turn. She couldn't ignore the contrast in how people were being treated. Jessica knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of a deeply rooted system, one that consistently overlooked and marginalized customers like her. She paused for a moment, realizing that if she truly wanted to change this, she had to do more than just take mental notes. The time for action had come. What Jessica experienced that day was only a glimpse of a much larger issue. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed or discriminated against by this system. She knew there was only one way to change it, from within. She needed to understand the system at its core and expose what was truly happening. Her undercover survey would no longer be just about observation. It would become a deliberate and forceful act. Jessica was determined to shed light on the injustice and ensure that this kind of discrimination would not continue. Not just in her bank, but in society as a whole. As Jessica continued her transaction at Monarch Financial, she began to notice a distinct pattern of discrimination, not just in how her requests were being handled, but in the bank's overall procedures and documentation requirements. When she requested to open an account and received guidance from Aidan Fox, the teller at the counter, something immediately felt off. Aidan simply handed her a brochure and told her to use the self-service kiosks if she wanted to save time. But what made Jessica even more uneasy was that when she asked to meet with a financial advisor, Aidan hesitated and told her she'd have to wait a long time, claiming that no advisors were currently available. A few moments later, Preston Reed, the customer service manager, approached and gave Jessica a cold, dismissive look before instructing Aidan bluntly, "She can use the self-service option. That's the fastest way to open an account." Preston showed no concern for the inconvenience Jessica was experiencing. She didn't just feel unimportant, she sensed a clear lack of transparency in how her requests were being handled. What upset Jessica even more was when she inquired about investment services and high-yield savings accounts, only to be asked to provide extensive documentation, far more than what other customers were asked for. While other clients, particularly white customers, were welcomed warmly and didn't have to present any additional paperwork, Jessica was required to submit a large volume of documents, including income verification, loan statements, and even details about her assets. This made it unmistakably clear that there were disparities in how the bank handled customers of different racial backgrounds. Even after she provided all the necessary paperwork, she still didn't receive the thorough assistance she deserved. As Preston Reed continued outlining the documentation requirements, he offered no clear explanation as to why Jessica was being asked for these additional materials while other customers weren't. This only reinforced Jessica's perception of overt racial discrimination. What's more, as Preston discussed the account opening process, he made no effort to provide a comprehensive overview or recommend the best options for her needs. Instead, he simply suggested that she use the self-service tools to save time for everyone involved. The lack of responsibility and disregard for her specific inquiries made Jessica increasingly suspicious of the bank's racial bias. It became apparent to Jessica that the bank's procedures were not designed to serve all customers equally. Instead, they created invisible barriers, especially for black clients like herself. The staff not only lacked warmth, but also failed to show genuine interest in the needs of minority customers. Jessica couldn't help but compare her experience to that of the white clients around her. These customers, even those who arrived after her, were welcomed warmly and swiftly connected with financial advisors, while she was made to wait longer and faced excessive documentation requests without any justification. Preston's demeanor was particularly troubling. He lacked friendliness, professionalism, and any form of proper customer engagement. His instructions to Jessica resembled those of a manager who didn't care. Cold, dismissive, and without proper explanation. While other customers were being offered guidance on services and matched with suitable financial products, Jessica was handed a brochure and told to use self-service tools with no involvement from a real advisor. The disparity was undeniable, and Jessica couldn't ignore it. She wasn't just being denied proper service, she was being treated like she didn't matter. As Jessica stepped away from the teller counter, her mind was racing with everything she had just experienced. The discrimination she had faced wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long-standing system within the bank. She realized that racial disparities in banking processes weren't accidental. They were embedded in systemic strategies. White customers appeared to consistently receive faster, prioritized service, while clients like her, even with complete financial documentation, were subjected to unnecessary hurdles, disrupted their overall experience. This only strengthened Jessica's conviction that the problem wasn't just personal. It was deeply rooted in Monarch Financial's policies and practices. Jessica stood at the service counter, gripping the brochure that Aidan had just handed her, filled with frustration and determination. She knew she could no longer remain silent about the way Preston Reed, the customer service manager, had treated her. To Jessica, this was no longer just a customer service issue, it was a reflection of the deep-rooted racial bias within the bank she had recently acquired. Even though she knew the situation was delicate, she decided to confront Preston directly. She could not allow this kind of discrimination to persist, especially not when she held the power to change it. Jessica walked back to the counter, locking eyes with Preston, who was speaking with another customer. There was no more time to wait. "Preston, I need to speak with you right now," she said firmly. Preston turned around, surprised to see Jessica standing there with a challenging look in her eyes, but he maintained a professional demeanor. He appeared unimpressed by her request and responded with a condescending smile, as if nothing serious was happening. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cold and devoid of concern for what Jessica had just gone through. Despite feeling disappointed by his disrespectful attitude, Jessica remained composed. "I want to know why I was treated differently than the other customers. Why was I asked to provide excessive documentation when others weren't?" she asked, meeting his gaze with unwavering firmness. Preston hesitated for a moment, clearly caught off guard, but quickly regained his confident facade. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "It's just our standard procedure. All new clients are required to submit additional documentation." But Jessica knew what he said wasn't true. She had seen with her own eyes that white customers were never asked to provide such unnecessary paperwork. She felt anger rising, but kept her voice calm. "This is not standard procedure. This is discrimination." Preston, realizing Jessica wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed, began to grow irritated. His tone sharpened. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. I'm just doing my job, and I don't have time to explain our processes to every customer. If you're not satisfied, maybe this isn't the bank for you." Jessica realized that this likely wasn't the first time Preston had used those words. It was clear he was using his position to impose his authority on customers he didn't favor, but she knew confronting him wasn't enough. She needed someone with more authority. Standing tall, she said firmly, "I'm not going to let this end here. Call the branch manager. I want to resolve this now, once and for all." Preston looked visibly irritated, but couldn't deny her request for an official resolution. He turned and glanced toward the manager's office. "The manager's not available right now, but do you want to speak with him?" he asked, trying to deflect. "Yes," Jessica replied without hesitation. "I want to speak to the manager immediately. I have every right to bring this to someone who can do something about it." She wasn't about to let this opportunity pass. If she didn't push for accountability now, the discrimination would continue to affect others. Jessica stood her ground, knowing that her actions today could make a difference. Moments later, Preston returned to inform her that the branch manager would be out shortly. Jessica felt a small sense of relief. Finally, the matter would be addressed. But she also felt apprehensive about how the manager would respond. Would he take her seriously, or would he defend employees like Preston? She didn't know yet, but she did know this: doing nothing would change nothing. As she waited, Jessica jotted down every detail she had observed that day at the bank, preparing herself to clearly explain everything that had happened and to propose specific actions to prevent it from recurring. Soon the branch manager appeared. He looked at Jessica with a serious and courteous expression, though there was a hint of discomfort in his eyes. Jessica didn't let it affect her. She immediately began outlining her experience, the excessive documentation demands, the disrespect from both Preston and Aidan, and the different treatment she had received simply because of the color of her skin. The manager said nothing while she spoke, but his eyes widened as he listened, understanding gradually surfacing on his face. "We cannot allow these issues to continue," he said eventually. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." Jessica felt some satisfaction in the manager's positive response, but she knew this was only the beginning. One meeting wouldn't change an entire system. She was committed to continuing her investigation, to observe and document what happened at other Monarch Financial branches as well. Jessica knew she was entering a long battle, but she was ready. Her goal wasn't just to discipline a few bad employees, it was to change the system itself so that every customer, regardless of race or status, would be treated with fairness and dignity. When Jessica demanded to speak with the branch manager, Preston Reed felt his authority being blatantly challenged. He couldn't tolerate the idea of a customer, especially one as confident and assertive as Jessica, daring to question issues he considered unworthy of concern. Feeling insulted, Preston grew increasingly agitated, and his demeanor shifted from cold indifference to outright hostility. Faced with resistance, he could no longer keep his composure. "You can't treat me like this," Preston shouted, swinging his arm in a threatening gesture. Jessica could feel the tension rising, but she stood her ground. She had no intention of backing down, not when things had escalated this far. As it became clear Jessica wasn't going to walk away, Preston grew visibly furious, abandoning any sense of professionalism. Instead of calmly discussing the issue and seeking resolution, he barked orders at the bank's security. "Get her out of here!" Preston yelled, his voice cracking with anger. The entire bank seemed to fall silent. All eyes turned toward the unfolding confrontation between Preston and Jessica. Chaos began to erupt as Preston went beyond verbal aggression. He lashed out physically. Unable to control himself, he struck Jessica across the face with an open palm, right in front of customers and staff. The sound of the slap echoed through the still air of the bank, shocking everyone present. Jessica felt the sting sharply, a burst of pain flashing through her mind, but she didn't retaliate. She simply stood there, silent, locking eyes with Preston, showing no fear, no panic, only resolve. The surrounding customers were immediately stunned by Preston's violent act. Though a few appeared ready to speak up, most remained frozen, silently filming the scene with their phones, capturing a shameful moment in the bank's history that no one had ever imagined witnessing. Jessica remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Preston. Despite the humiliation of being struck in public, she refused to let emotion take over. She knew exactly what needed to happen next. Rather than lash out or walk away, Jessica calmly took charge of the moment. "Call the police," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Let them handle this." Her words rang through the tense atmosphere, sending a wave of unease throughout the room. Preston stood frozen, his face flushed with rage, but there was nothing more he could say. His arrogance began to collapse as he realized that his actions were not just aggressive, they were criminal. He understood, perhaps too late, that his behavior had crossed a line, but rather than take responsibility, Preston doubled down on intimidation. "You'll regret this," he barked furiously. But Jessica didn't flinch. She knew she was on the right side of the truth, and nothing Preston said could change that. People around them were beginning to understand that this was no longer just a moment of unprofessionalism. It was a clear and painful exposure of the discriminatory system embedded in the bank. Soon after the slap, the police arrived, and the gravity of the situation became undeniable. Jessica stood firm, not showing fear or pain. She had faced hostility before, and she knew that confronting these injustices was part of her greater mission to bring lasting change. Officers entered the bank and began investigating the incident. Their presence only highlighted how serious the confrontation had become. The atmosphere was thick with tension as everyone awaited the next move. Every eye fixed on Preston and Jessica, anticipating what would come next. Police began interviewing employees, including Preston and Jessica, asking for statements and accounts of what happened. Jessica didn't rush to defend herself. She remained quiet, allowing the process to unfold. She knew she had acted appropriately, and that what had just occurred was only one chapter in her long journey to expose deep-rooted discrimination. In that moment, Jessica felt she had made a breakthrough. Racial injustice wasn't just about isolated incidents, it was a systemic failure, and she was determined to confront it head-on. This battle was only beginning, and Jessica was more than ready to see it through. When the police finally arrived, the atmosphere inside the bank became more tense than ever. Preston Reed, wearing a smug and arrogant expression, immediately pointed at Jessica and demanded the police arrest her. "She's the one causing trouble," Preston declared confidently. "She's not only disruptive, but has also threatened staff and customers." His voice rang out with authority, as if police support was something he had been counting on all along. All eyes turned toward Jessica, and some customers began to grow uneasy as the officers approached. But Jessica showed no panic. She stood tall, firmly grounded, and calmly made a call to her team. She knew this was a pivotal moment to expose the truth and reclaim control. Jessica summoned her senior team, including lawyers and financial executives, and asked them to arrive at the bank immediately. She understood the need to assert her authority and ownership of Monarch Financial, something Preston had no idea about. As the tense moments passed, Jessica maintained her composure and confidence. While Preston and the bank's staff continued to act defiant, Jessica quickly connected with her team over the phone, providing them with all the necessary details. She knew that, for her team, every second counted in the effort to restore justice. They would arrive shortly, and Jessica was certain they would shift the balance of power completely. Once her order was received, she knew this would be a turning point, one that would clarify and resolve the issue once and for all. Although the police initially seemed to lean in Preston's favor, they too began to sense the heavy tension in the air. They stood uncertain, unsure of how to proceed. Jessica knew that her next move had to be making everything transparent, revealing who the real aggressor in the situation was. When her team arrived, everything began to change. Her lawyers and senior representatives from Timberlake Financial entered the bank with authority, reinforcing Jessica's power and position in the situation. "Please review the evidence," Jessica calmly but firmly requested the officers. "I'm the owner of this bank, and this is not a minor incident that can be dismissed." Her voice rang clearly through the thick tension, prompting everyone in the room to reconsider what had just transpired. Jessica remained patient, but left no detail overlooked. She presented documentation proving her ownership of the bank and requested that the police review the bank's security footage. She knew that the surveillance videos would be the deciding factor in revealing the truth. She was no longer just a discriminated customer. She was a leader, a CEO who owned this institution, and she would not allow racial bias or Preston's unprofessional behavior to continue affecting her or any other customer. Her team was fully prepared to support her, and the police began re-examining the evidence immediately. When the security footage was played back, the entire room fell silent. The footage captured every moment, from when Jessica entered the bank to when she was assaulted by Preston. Every act of discrimination, disrespect, and violence was laid bare. The officers, who had initially appeared biased toward Preston, now fully grasped the injustice that had occurred. Their shift in attitude was obvious. They began listening closely to Jessica, and there was no longer any doubt that she had been treated unfairly throughout the ordeal. The police quickly realized they could not simply take Preston's word without fully reviewing the facts. Remaining calm and assertive, Jessica called for the next steps to be taken to properly address the incident. She knew Preston would have to face the consequences of his actions. The officers now understood this wasn't just an isolated event. It was part of a much larger pattern of systemic racism that Jessica was determined to expose. Under Jessica's leadership, the situation was handled swiftly and effectively. What mattered now was that not only Preston but the entire system within Monarch Financial would be held accountable for the discrimination that had taken place. Jessica wasn't just standing up for herself. She was speaking out for everyone who had ever been treated unjustly. Jessica could feel the change unfolding before her eyes. Though the situation had escalated, she knew this was the beginning of a true revolution in the banking industry. Preston's actions would not derail her mission. As she looked at her team, they all understood that this fight wasn't just about transforming one bank, it was about transforming an entire industry long plagued by deep-rooted racism. Jessica was ready to dismantle the system from within and build a fairer future for everyone. Jessica could no longer allow the deception to continue. She decided it was time to reveal her identity and announce to everyone that she was the owner of Monarch Financial. With a resolute expression, Jessica stood in the tense atmosphere of the bank, commanding the attention of everyone present. There was no panic or hesitation in her demeanor. On the contrary, her calmness only added to the authority she exuded. "I am Jessica Walker, CEO of Walker Financial Group, and I own Monarch Financial," she declared, her voice strong and echoing through the silent bank. Every word she spoke was a clear message to Preston Reed and all the bank employees that they could no longer continue treating her or any customer the way they had before. Her revelation was not just a personal act, but a declaration of power and a commitment to imminent and sweeping change. Immediately, all eyes turned to Jessica. Preston Reed, who had previously carried himself with arrogance and condescension, could no longer hide his shock and fear. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he had just heard. None of the other employees could have imagined that the woman they had treated with coldness and bias was in fact the owner of the very bank they worked for. Every act of disrespect they had shown her now became a source of deep shame. Preston, who had always thought of himself as a powerful figure at the bank, had nothing to say. He stood there, his face pale, unable to look Jessica in the eye. Murmurs spread among the staff, whispers of disbelief. Everyone was beginning to realize they were witnessing something unimaginable in their workplace. Jessica didn't let the silence drag on. She moved forward with her decision. "Preston Reed, effective immediately, you are terminated," she stated, her voice calm but razor-sharp. There was no need for rage or theatrics. Her decision carried the confidence and authority of a true leader. The employees around them could feel the seismic shift unfolding before their eyes. What Preston had done could no longer be tolerated. His actions toward Jessica had not only been unethical, but had violated the basic standards of professionalism and fairness. Jessica stared at him with a cold gaze, unmoved by the panic in his face. Her decision was final and irreversible. As the announcement of Preston's dismissal echoed through the bank, Jessica made it clear that sweeping changes would begin immediately. "Monarch Financial will no longer be a place that tolerates racism and misconduct," she declared. She emphasized that the bank would be restructured from the ground up, from customer service protocols to how employees treated clients. Standards would be overhauled, and anyone unwilling to comply would have no place in the company. Jessica wanted every employee to understand that this transformation was not optional. It was a core part of her long-term commitment to building a better institution. As Preston was escorted out of the bank, Jessica turned to the remaining staff, her gaze unwavering. She called the other leaders forward and made them confront the consequences of their actions. Every one of them needed to understand that if they didn't change their mindset and behavior, they too would have to leave. "You've had the chance to work in an environment where discrimination was quietly accepted, but that ends now," Jessica said, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. She didn't need to say much more. Her words were enough to make it clear that Monarch Financial would never be the same again. She was ushering in a new era, one in which fairness and mutual respect would take precedence above all else. The employees, whether they had been indifferent or complicit before, now had to face the reality that their actions would be publicly scrutinized and held accountable. Jessica was not just a CEO. She was someone unafraid to stand up for ethical values and workplace justice. This was the moment when real change would begin, and nothing could stop it. She required all employees to participate in retraining programs to understand the importance of fairness, both in the workplace and in client relations. Anyone unwilling to meet these new standards would no longer be welcome at Monarch Financial. With her determination and resolve, Jessica sent a clear message to all employees and customers of Monarch Financial. It was a message of justice, the power of doing what's right, and the courage to face challenges in order to reform an entire system. Jessica Walker was not just the owner of this bank. She was the driving force behind a revolution in the banking industry, one in which every customer, no matter who they are, would be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Jessica walked away from her confrontation with Preston Reed and the employees of Monarch Financial with a renewed sense of determination. She knew that firing Preston was only the first step in a long-term plan to transform the entire workplace culture at the bank. After issuing these decisive actions, Jessica turned to the room full of staff members who had just witnessed the shift in power firsthand. She knew they needed to fully understand that any acts of racial discrimination, disrespect, or unfair treatment would no longer be tolerated. She proceeded to make an official announcement regarding Preston Reed's termination and called for a comprehensive reform within the bank. Preston Reed is no longer a part of this institution. My decision is clear, and it sends a message to all of you. We will no longer accept racism or misconduct in this bank, Jessica declared. She emphasized that this was not just about a firing, it was the beginning of a revolution that would uproot harmful practices and transform how every employee operated. Immediately, Jessica mandated that all employees participate in retraining programs, especially those focusing on fair and respectful treatment of every customer. She understood that changing a deeply rooted system required education and a shift in mindset. These training sessions will help you better understand the importance of fairness and how your actions can directly impact customers and the bank's culture, Jessica continued. She expected not only for staff to absorb new knowledge, but to abandon their unconscious biases and habitual discriminatory behaviors. Every employee would be held accountable for their actions and must recognize this as a chance to become part of a positive transformation rather than clinging to outdated practices that no longer had a place in today's world. She also made it clear that any employee who refused to comply with the new policies and expectations would face strict consequences. This is your opportunity to prove that you can change, and for those who cannot adapt to the new standards, there will be no place for them at Monarch Financial, Jessica stated firmly. Her words were not merely a warning, they were a promise. Jessica would do whatever it took to uphold the values she believed in, ensuring that discrimination and injustice would no longer go unchecked. Every employee had to recognize that they were either part of the solution or part of the problem. Jessica was not afraid to disrupt the status quo to restore integrity and trust within the bank, even if it caused initial discomfort. She also announced that the transformation would extend beyond procedural changes. It would reach into the very culture of the institution. We are going to build a workplace where everyone is respected and treated equally. There will be no room for bias or inequity, Jessica said. She wanted the entire organization to change from the inside out, not just adopt new processes, but also new attitudes and behaviors. This was a cultural revolution, not only to satisfy customers, but to fulfill the ethical responsibilities of a modern financial institution. Jessica affirmed that true success in banking comes not just from profit margins, but from doing what is right and safeguarding the rights of all customers, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Jessica understood that this change would not happen overnight. It would require time and perseverance. However, she believed that with strong resolve and bold leadership, the bank could follow a new, righteous path. These decisions would not only improve the bank's public image, but lay a solid foundation for building a fairer and more effective workplace. She reiterated that this was only the beginning for Monarch Financial to become a model of what a bank should truly be, a place where every customer feels seen, valued, and respected. You must all understand that this isn't just my demand, it's a shared responsibility, Jessica stated. She wanted her team to realize that this change would benefit everyone, from clients to staff, and would cultivate a healthier, more empowering work culture where each individual's worth was recognized. She concluded her address with a powerful message. If you cannot align yourself with the new values we are building, I won't hesitate to make further dismissals. But I believe that each of you has the capacity to change, and I hope you'll join me in creating a workplace where everyone can grow and thrive, Jessica said. Her words served as both encouragement and a clear challenge to anyone hesitant to embrace the future. Jessica was not just determined to build a financially strong institution, she was determined to lead one that would stand at the forefront of justice and equity. And she was fully prepared to do whatever it took to turn that vision into reality. When the incident unfolded, the customers present at the bank were taken aback and felt uneasy about what they had just witnessed. But as soon as Jessica publicly declared herself the owner of Monarch Financial and began to take bold actions, everything started to change. The customers no longer looked at her with suspicion or concern. They realized that the changes they were witnessing were clear signs of fairness and transparency. This not only gave them peace of mind, but also offered hope for a better future, one where they could receive fair treatment regardless of their race or social status. This sudden transformation didn't just improve the work environment, it radiated a sense of trust and security to those who had previously felt neglected by the banking system. Customers began to notice a clear difference in the way the bank treated them, and for the first time, they felt truly respected. Jessica had become a role model for anyone seeking to change an unjust system from within. She wasn't just a brilliant CEO, she was a trailblazer, leading a revolution of fairness and dignity in the financial world. Her decisiveness in addressing the bank's internal issues, along with her bold steps to reform its culture and operational procedures, had a profound impact. She didn't just change how the bank functioned, she proved that one individual could make a meaningful difference in even the most entrenched institutions. Jessica's actions showed that if someone has the determination and courage to stand up against wrongdoing, they can spark change not just within a company, but across the entire industry they are part of. Through her courage to confront challenges and stay true to her values, Jessica demonstrated that systemic change from within is both possible and powerful. Jessica's resistance and actions quickly spread across media platforms and social networks. Videos capturing the events at Monarch Financial went viral, and the message of justice and equity quickly gained traction. Social media became a powerful space for people to express their admiration and support for what Jessica had done. Stories about racial discrimination in financial institutions were nothing new, but the way Jessica took direct, decisive action to challenge a broken system brought renewed attention. Posts, comments, and shared videos ignited a widespread conversation about fairness in banking and other industries. Jessica became a symbol for those fighting for justice, and she inspired countless others to believe that they too could make a difference in their own communities. Jessica's actions didn't just resonate within the banking world. They rippled across the broader community. People who had experienced racial discrimination and once felt powerless now saw they weren't alone. She proved that anyone could rise up and confront injustice without fear, even when it meant challenging long-standing systems. Posts, discussions, and small demonstrations supporting Jessica began to emerge, and professionals across banking and other industries started to ask difficult but necessary questions. Are other banks perpetuating similar discriminatory practices? Are businesses truly treating all customers fairly, or are their promises just empty words? Jessica helped spark a vital dialogue not just about individual misconduct, but about systemic equity across the entire financial landscape. The widespread impact of Jessica's actions marked a pivotal turning point, fueling momentum for reform across many sectors. Thousands of people began paying attention to the issue and felt motivated to act. NGOs, social justice activists, and advocates for minority rights started calling for broader reforms in the financial industry. Media outlets began interviewing experts about discrimination within financial institutions and exploring potential solutions. Jessica's story of changing a system from the inside didn't just inspire curiosity. It prompted real, tangible change. Calls for accountability continued to spread, and more people began to feel that now was the time to stand up, fight for their rights, and seek justice in their workplaces. Jessica was not just a CEO. She became the face of a movement for systemic change in the banking industry. She led by example for anyone hoping to bring transformation to their own work environment, regardless of their field. Her actions reached far beyond a single bank. They ignited a powerful movement toward a more just world, one where everyone is treated with dignity and fairness, regardless of race, gender, or background. She proved that real change can happen when we're willing to confront uncomfortable truths and persist in fighting for what is right. Every step Jessica took served as a powerful reminder that we all have the ability to make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the growth and progress of our entire society. After publicly revealing her identity and announcing her ownership of Monarch Financial, Jessica quickly issued several important announcements to all staff members. She called for an emergency meeting to outline major changes that would take immediate effect throughout the bank. Jessica began by making it clear that the bank needed a complete transformation, from the inside out. She emphasized that a bank should not exist solely for financial figures, but for respect and fair treatment of all its customers. She required every employee, from senior management to frontline tellers, to follow the new procedures, in which service quality and creating a fair working environment would be top priorities. These changes were not temporary. They were part of a long-term commitment to build a truly welcoming, trustworthy, and discrimination-free financial institution. Jessica announced that the bank would conduct regular audits to evaluate customer service quality at all branches. She confirmed that these inspections would be unannounced and without exception. The goal was to ensure that employees consistently maintained the highest service standards and adhered to the newly established fairness protocols. These evaluations would not be based solely on revenue or transaction volumes, but would also assess attitude, customer treatment, and compliance with the bank's equity principles. Jessica believed that any bank hoping to grow sustainably must earn the trust and support of its clients. Therefore, all employees needed to work with a mindset of continuous improvement, listening to customer needs and refining their communication and problem-solving skills to ensure every client received the best service possible. In addition to internal audits, Jessica announced a series of customer experience evaluations that would be conducted across all Monarch Financial branches. These assessments would be carried out by independent experts from outside the bank to ensure complete objectivity. She stressed that no branch, whether large or small, would be exempt from these evaluations. These reviews would not only rely on traditional metrics, but would also focus on employee attitude, friendliness, enthusiasm, and ability to resolve real-world issues. Jessica understood that transformation could not happen overnight, but she believed that with patience and collective commitment, they could build a more positive and inclusive work environment that would enable long-term growth for the bank. Jessica also stated that every employee would be required to undergo retraining programs to ensure they fully understood the bank's changes and how to implement them. She requested that these programs focus not only on customer interaction skills, but also on the importance of equity and inclusion in the workplace. The training sessions would be held regularly, with progress assessments to monitor each individual's development. The goal of these programs was to help employees not only learn the new procedures, but also develop essential soft skills for their day-to-day responsibilities. Jessica believed that when employees are fully equipped with the right knowledge and tools, they can handle any situation with confidence and deliver excellent service. Jessica made it clear that the bank would not tolerate any non-compliance with the new procedures. She emphasized that any employee who failed to meet expectations would face strict disciplinary action, including termination or reassignment if necessary. She understood that such changes might be met with resistance, but she firmly believed that bold transformation was the only path to a more equitable and sustainable future for the bank. Jessica encouraged employees to see this as an opportunity to grow their own value and help build a financial institution that every customer could trust. She also pledged her support, assuring staff that she would stand by them throughout the process and provide guidance whenever they encountered challenges in implementing these reforms. Finally, Jessica stated that Monarch Financial would begin evaluating the effectiveness of these changes within the next 3 months. She instructed all branches to prepare reports on the reforms implemented and submit recommendations for the next steps. Jessica hoped these reforms would not only drive growth but also enhance the bank's reputation in the public eye, particularly among minority communities who had previously been overlooked by the financial sector. She believed that if the bank could carry out these reforms successfully, it would not only maintain its market position, but also earn long-term trust from its customers and communities. Following the incident at Monarch Financial, videos and images capturing the most critical moments quickly went viral across social media platforms. Footage recorded by customers on site was shared thousands of times, sparking a powerful wave of public reaction. People were shocked by the blatant racial discrimination that Jessica had endured. At a bank she herself owned, posts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok began attracting attention not only from the general public, but also from the media. Reporters and news programs quickly picked up the story, turning it into a hot topic in broader conversations about racial injustice and equity in the financial sector. Stories of discrimination and unfair practices within banks were no longer hidden. They had become an urgent issue of public concern. This led people to start asking difficult questions about the reality of systemic racism within the banking industry, an industry often viewed as the foundation of financial stability. These questions went beyond service delivery and touched on the underlying policies that many banks had implemented, often quietly, over decades. The public was no longer indifferent. They began to recognize the structural inequalities in the financial system and demanded real change. Jessica, through her courageous and decisive actions, emerged as a symbol of transformation within the banking industry. She stood not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, mistreated, or marginalized within the financial system. Her actions exposed deep flaws in the industry and proved that meaningful change could happen, even from within. In the aftermath of the incident, Jessica received overwhelming support from the community and from organizations advocating for civil rights and minority empowerment. Human rights groups, labor advocacy networks, and various social justice organizations spoke out in praise of Jessica's boldness. They saw her as a role model, someone unafraid to confront injustice and take a stand against discrimination. These organizations not only offered public thanks, but also emphasized that Jessica had created a new opportunity for reform across the banking sector, where everyone could have fair and transparent access to financial services. She was invited to speak at forums, conferences, and on television programs to share her story and her vision for a more equitable financial system. The wave of change sparked by Jessica's actions didn't stop at Monarch Financial. Other banks began reviewing their own practices, re-examining policies, especially those related to racial bias. Surveys and research into how banks treated minority customers were launched, and reports on these issues drew increasing attention. Financial experts and banking executives began facing public scrutiny and were pushed to reform their operations to ensure they were no longer passive enablers of discrimination. Industry-wide reforms became increasingly unavoidable, and Jessica became a symbol of progress, not just for finance, but for anyone fighting for justice. As a Black woman who built a multi-billion-dollar financial empire from the ground up, Jessica had already overcome tremendous obstacles, but through this experience, she realized that no success is truly complete if the people around her are not afforded the same opportunities. With support from communities and advocacy groups, Jessica became a pioneer in building a fairer banking system, one that left no one behind. She didn't just transform the operations of a single bank, she ignited a movement that reshaped public consciousness around how minority customers are treated in financial institutions. The praise and support Jessica received were more than just gestures of gratitude. They were signs of encouragement, reaffirming that she was on the right path. Each time Jessica shared her story, she received responses from individuals with similar experiences, people who had been ignored by the financial system for years. This only strengthened her resolve to transform the banking industry, not just to create a fair workplace, but also to ensure every citizen had equal access to financial services, without fear of bias or mistreatment. The movement Jessica began would not end with a single incident. It would continue to grow, driving deep and lasting reforms throughout the financial world. After the shocking events at Monarch Financial, Jessica had completed a crucial and challenging mission that brought about sweeping changes to the bank she owned. However, her work did not end there. Although the reforms she had implemented produced immediate positive results, Jessica understood that the fight against racism and injustice in the banking industry was far from over. She was not content with reforming just one branch. She aimed to build a fair and transparent model for the entire banking system. What happened at Monarch Financial was only the beginning of a long-term strategy to transform the entire financial sector, especially for minority communities who had suffered discrimination for decades. Every action and decision Jessica made was directed toward the ultimate goal of creating a banking system that is fair and respectful to all customers, regardless of race or social background. In the weeks following the incident, Jessica continued to push forward with bold reforms at Monarch Financial. She required all branches to follow new protocols and participate in retraining programs focused on fairness and customer respect. Employees were expected to fully understand and diligently implement the new policies, from the way they welcomed clients to how they handled transactions. Jessica knew that lasting change would only occur if every bank employee embraced the core principles of equality and non-discrimination. She also mandated that senior management conduct regular audits to assess compliance with the new standards. Her goal was to ensure that every Monarch Financial branch operated under a unified code of conduct and that no one was left behind. Jessica understood that transforming the system wasn't just about rewriting policy. It was about reshaping the mindset of everyone in the organization. Jessica remained committed not only to maintaining the reforms she had implemented, but also to spreading a spirit of reform throughout the broader financial industry. She knew that Monarch Financial alone could not change the entire financial system, but if every bank and financial institution made a commitment to equity and respect, then real change would be within reach. She had become a role model for those advocating for minority rights in the financial world. Jessica affirmed that the fight against racial injustice in finance was not over. She planned to keep pushing for reforms and driving deep changes throughout the system. She began organizing conferences and meetings with leaders of other banks to discuss how institutions could improve services and build a fairer financial environment. Jessica's commitment to equity and transformation was unwavering. Throughout her reform journey, Jessica focused not only on changing procedures, but also on fostering a positive and healthy workplace culture. She understood that changing policy was important, but creating a work environment where every employee felt respected and valued was equally vital. She devoted significant time and effort to training staff on the importance of diversity and inclusion. Jessica encouraged employees to share their ideas and feedback on the new policies, to ensure that the reforms were not just theoretical, but also practical and effective. She wanted every staff member to feel included and to have opportunities for growth within the bank. For Jessica, even small changes could create meaningful impact if implemented the right way. Jessica also launched new social responsibility and community investment initiatives at Monarch Financial. She spearheaded programs to fund local organizations, support small businesses, and help low-income individuals access financial services more easily. She pledged to continue pursuing long-term goals focused on sustainable growth and meaningful contributions to the well-being of the communities Monarch Financial served. Her dedication extended beyond internal bank reforms. She aimed to improve the quality of life for those in society who needed support the most. Jessica knew that systemic change wouldn't come from one bank alone. It would require collaboration from the entire community and financial sector. With the reforms she implemented, Jessica not only transformed one bank, but also reshaped society's perception of racism and fairness in the financial industry. She became a powerful symbol of change from within, a role model for those fighting for the rights of marginalized communities. Jessica's actions not only made Monarch Financial a better place for its customers, but also inspired a wave of transformation across the banking sector, opening doors to a more just and equitable future. Though her work was never easy, Jessica understood that this change was necessary, and she would continue to fight for a transparent, fair, and discrimination-free financial system. She looked ahead with confidence, believing that while the journey was long and difficult, it would ultimately lead to a better and more deserving outcome. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovering powerful stories of inspiration and transformation. It is people like you, those who stand for justice and truth, who motivate us to keep sharing these incredible stories. You have a big heart, always supporting fairness and striving to make the world a better place. If these stories have inspired you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share them so we can spread this message even further. Let us continue to spark positive change and inspire our communities together. You are the most important part of this journey, and we are truly honored to have you by our side. Thank you so much.